Okay, thank you. Thank you and welcome to those who are here tonight. And I just want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and we will post it on our website. So tonight we are here for the Town of Moraga Comprehensive Advanced Planning Initiative. The purpose of tonight's meeting is the scoping meeting for the environmental review. The Town of Moraga is preparing its Comprehensive Advanced Planning Initiative, which includes an update to the town's housing element, rezoning of key sites within the town's jurisdiction, and amendments to the general plan. The town has determined that an environmental impact report, or an EIR, will be necessary to evaluate the environmental impacts of the Advanced Planning Initiative pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, which is known as CEQA. And so in compliance with CEQA, the town is the lead agency. And tonight we are conducting a notice of preparation meeting to get some verbal comments from the audience and from residents who are in the town. And I will begin the meeting. Going to the next slide. So tonight's agenda, we'll do brief introductions of staff and consultants. We'll go through a project description. We'll discuss briefly what CEQA is and what is a scoping. We'll go over the schedule and the next steps. We'll also offer how to submit comments and questions from the audience who are attending tonight. So from the town staff, we have myself. I'm the planning director with the Town of Moraga. We have Brian Horn, who is the associate planner. We have Mio Mendez, who is the assistant planner. And from our consultant side, for the Advanced Planning Initiative, we have Barry Miller with Barry Miller Consulting. And we have Darcy Cramen with Rincon Consultants, and she will be assisting us with the environmental review of the project. So we have we have a lot of staff and consultants to work on this project. And as an introduction, the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, requires the town to convene a scoping meeting for its Comprehensive Advanced Planning Initiative. And then the purpose of the scoping meeting is to identify environmental issues related to the project before we prepare an EIR. So the scoping can also identify feasible alternatives or mitigation measures to avoid potential significant environmental effects. And from here, I am going to turn it over to Barry to go through some slides, and then Darcy will take over some slides after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Afsha. I'm Barry Miller. I'm the consulting project manager for the Advanced Planning Initiative. We have a few slides which define what the project is. So with any environmental impact report, there is a project that is being evaluated. In this case, the project consists of multiple components which collectively form the Comprehensive Advanced Planning Initiative. We're going to walk you through those components in the next couple of slides. You can go to the next one. So the first component and one of the drivers behind this process is the housing element. This is an update to part of the Moraga General Plan. Housing elements are mandatory. They're required by the state of California. They have been for over 50 years. This is the only part of the general plan that has to be certified by the state of California. When we complete this document, it is submitted to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for certification, and it's updated on an 8-year cycle. The content of the housing element is something that's defined by the state government code. There are many prescriptive requirements for what has to be in a housing element. About 200 pages of data and analysis that's included in the document that looks at our housing needs, our land supply, constraints to building housing, and then policies, programs, and specific objectives for the kind of housing and quantity of housing that we hope to build during the 8-year period. One of the drivers, again, behind the housing element is we have to demonstrate to the state that the town is doing its fair share, or it's accommodating its fair share of the region's housing needs. And that fair share number is something that's determined by the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. In this cycle, Moraga's assignment or fair share is 1,118 units of housing. That includes 501 units that are affordable to low and very low income households. And I want to point out that the assignment of 1,118 units is not the same as the town building 1,118 units. What it is saying is we must demonstrate we have the capacity through our zoning to accommodate 1,118 units of housing, and then have the rules in place so that the private sector and the nonprofit sector can build that housing during the planning cycle. It's not the town itself that is building the housing assignment. Next slide, please. So the next component of the project is rezoning. We know based on the RHNA number, the 1,118 units, that we currently do not have a sufficient number of sites that are zoned to build that quantity of housing, particularly at the multifamily end. So we do have enough sites to build our above moderate income need, which is primarily single family detached homes, but the low and very low income need is typically met through multifamily housing. And the town has a very limited number of sites that are zoned for multifamily housing, particularly at the densities that are needed to produce affordable units. So we're looking at doing some strategic rezoning as part of this process to create that capacity. That'll primarily be in the Moraga Center area, where Moraga Road and Moraga Way intersect, kind of the Safeway Shopping Center vicinity, and also in the Ream Park Shopping Center area, generally around the Ream Theater in that area. We anticipate that the rezoning will include allowing multifamily housing on some commercial properties, in other words, office and retail sites, where it's not permitted today under our current zoning, and also increasing the allowable density, or the number of units per acre, for multifamily development on some sites where multifamily housing already is permitted. The other zoning change that we'll be looking at is coming up with standards that facilitate streamlining development approval, so that if a project comes in and it meets all of the standards that are included in our zoning regulations, it is subject to a streamlined approval process. And again, the bullet at the bottom of the slide here is what I was just mentioning. This is not a specific development project that we're talking about. This is about the rules that govern private development in the town in future years. Next slide. So another part of the planning initiative is amendments to the Moraga General Plan. You see the cover of the plan on the bottom left that it says 2002. So we have a general plan that was adopted 20 years ago, and there are some components of that that need to be updated, both for internal consistency, because we're going to be making some changes to accommodate the housing needs, but also because state law has changed and there are new requirements that apply to our circulation element, which looks at our traffic and transportation, and our safety element. And the safety element focuses on topics like wildfire safety, evacuation, flooding, earthquake, and landslide hazards, and so on. So there'll be a number of amendments to our policies and programs that happen in the general plan, and that is another component. Next slide. And finally, the Bollinger Canyon Study Area rezoning. There is an area of 423 acres on the eastern edge of Moraga, east of St. Mary's College, that is designated a study area. It has been designated a study area since the general plan was first adopted, and that designation was intended to be a temporary designation for eventual rezoning of that property. That has not happened, and the zone that's study area zone is still in place today. The town started the process of applying new zoning designations, convened a neighborhood meeting in January, and had a town council study session just a few weeks ago to discuss zoning options for this area. And we're now developing new general plan policies and new zoning districts and designations and standards based on that council direction. Again, no development projects are proposed in this area. This is strictly about applying zoning and general plan designations. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darcy. So that's essentially the project that's being analyzed, and Darcy will tell you about the EIR and the process.
Thanks, Barry. Yes, so as Afsha mentioned, I'm Darcy Kremen. I'm Director of Environmental Planning at Rincon Consultants, and we are the consultants working on the CEQA EIR. So just really briefly, what is CEQA? It was enacted in 1970, the State's Environmental Quality Act. Essentially, it is a public disclosure and input process. So it's all about public disclosure of environmental effects of the project prior to approval. Then the state requires that the town also do its best to minimize, reduce, or avoid those environmental impacts to the extent feasible. At the end of the process, usually you adopt a mitigation monitoring program if it's not part of the general plan. And for this project, it is going to be a program level analysis. It's not site specific, but it's looking at the entire project over the whole of the town, the changes, potential impacts, and site-specific analyses could be required down the road. Next slide. So the CEQA environmental review process is extensive. First, the town circulates its notice of preparation, which we did. And this is the process we're in right now, where the town solicits input on the content of the EIR. So here we are looking for content from the public and agencies. This is the beginning of the environmental process, and there's other places where the town will look for input. After receiving input on the scope of the environmental document, the town will prepare the draft EIR and then publish the draft EIR. At that point, the town will be looking for comments on the draft EIR during a public review period, which is 45 days. After that, the town takes the comments on the draft EIR, prepares a final EIR, which consists of a response to comments document, an errata, and packaged up any other findings in that document, and the final mitigation monitoring and reporting program if needed. The town will publish that final EIR and take it as part of the package to the Planning Commission and eventually to Town Council to make a decision on the project, which is the Advanced Planning Initiative, but also to certify the environmental document. Next slide. So what is scoping? We're particularly looking for public input on the environmental analyses in the document. And there are a lot of topic areas. I'll show you in the next slide. But we're looking for thoughts on issues of concern, potential alternatives to the project, and alternatives to the project under CEQA mean they meet most of the project objectives and reduce or avoid an environmental effect. So we're looking for ideas for alternatives and also proposed mitigation measures. Is there something that would help reduce or avoid an environmental effect? Next slide. We study 20 topics in our CEQA guidelines that they give us a big range of topics from aesthetics all the way to wildfire and cumulative analysis as well for all of these topics. It is a program level analysis. So again, we're not looking at sites specifically, but we're looking at the town as a whole. But we look at all of these different topics. It's quite extensive. Next slide. The EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, is structured so that you'll get an introduction and summary in the very beginning. Here's what the project is, here are the impacts we found and mitigation measures proposed. You'll have an extensive project description with maps. And then under each of the environmental topic, you will have a setting section, which shows the current environmental setting, what's happening there today, as well as the regulatory setting. So what laws and regulations and policies are already in place that would reduce or avoid environmental effects. Then we look at impacts from the project, whether it would be significant or less than significant. And then finally, we do recommend mitigation measures where we have found a potentially significant impact. We also look again in the EIR at alternatives. So there'll be an entire chapter of alternatives, including the no project alternative, which in this case means using the current general plan designations and zoning, what would happen if the no project persists. And we also look at other impacts, which is the things that kind of I call the kitchen sink chapter, but it's everything else that we look at, including the cumulative analyses and irreversible changes to the environment. Again, this is a program EIR, so it's a series of actions that will govern future activities rather than any specific project or site. Next slide. So we have transitioned from looking at level of service, or LOS, to vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, for transportation impact assessments in CEQA. This actually happened in under SB, Senate Bill 743 in 2013. So older bill, but only really enacted in July of 2020, where all communities had to start looking at vehicle miles traveled for impacts. We needed it because we needed a different way to look at infill projects, at places where we already had services and people living, but we wanted to put more people perhaps, and we didn't want to look at having to expand or widen roads because there was more traffic. We wanted to look at this metric of vehicle miles traveled. How many miles would somebody travel from home to their work or their school or shopping, instead of just every car on the road. So we measure it differently than LOS because we are measuring it per capita. So for residential projects, we look at it from home to wherever they're going. So the more people in one location, the higher the per capita number, the lower the VMT. The benefits, of course, is that we aren't pushed into doing road widening and doing things where we are impacting the roadway network for just one project, or pushing the costs of doing those things onto one project. Next slide. So when we used to do LOS under CEQA, it was more understandable when you saw the impacts and you saw the analyses, because everything got a letter grade. And we all like letter grades because we had those in high school. We know what an A is. We like A's. We don't like Fs, right? So we could see that this project was going to reduce the LOS on a road from a B to a C. And we know that's bad. We were like, oh, yes, that's bad. We don't want to go from a B to a C. Now we're going to be looking at numbers. We're going to be looking at these raw numbers, and it's a little difficult to understand. So I have this little graphic to explain it, but what the traffic analyses are going to do is look at from home, which is the middle of this picture, how far someone travels. On the right-hand side, 2 miles to get their coffee. They don't measure how long it takes them to get to work on the bottom, but the 11 miles back from work to home. And on the left-hand side, a mile to get gas, some distance to go to the grocery store, and then 2 miles back to home. So when they add up all those loops, it's 16 miles. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority has given us a metric for Contra Costa County of what the VMT is today, regional VMT, and what number we need to be, because we need to be 15% below regional. So when we do our analyses, and I'm not a traffic expert, but when we run these analyses, we say the project's VMT will be 14.3. CCTA has told us that the number we want to hit is 14.2. So therefore we're higher than the number that CCTA has given us as our threshold. So it's a little complicated, but we wanted to make sure that we could at least explain where these numbers come from, because they're a little less understandable than going from an A to a B or a B to a C. And that's it for me. Timeline. Is that Barry?
Yes, thank you, Darcy. I just wanted to add to the VMT slide that we have a member of the consulting team, a firm called Farron Piers, doing the VMT evaluation. And so the consulting team includes both Rincon and a number of other consultants. Farron Piers is one of the leaders and has done this work for many of the other communities in Contra Costa County, and they're actually based in Walnut Creek. So we're going to just spend a moment on the timeline. We're a couple of months, actually about 6 months now into the project. In winter 2021-22, What we've done at this point so far is the needs assessment for the housing element, some of the initial public involvement and community engagement, an evaluation of the last housing element, which is all required under state law. We are currently in the process of identifying housing sites and looking at our zoning options. We're also working on the preliminary Bollinger rezoning, which is not in the timeline here. The upcoming tasks include the preparation of the draft housing element and the rezoning proposals, which will be completed by June of 2022. At that point, we will be submitting the draft housing element to the state, to HCD. They have 90 days to review the draft and give us comments. This is all before anything gets adopted, but we will be preparing our environmental impact report during that time period. So while the state is reviewing the document, we'll be busy preparing the EIR. This all comes back at the end of 2022 to the Planning Commission and Town Council. The release of the draft EIR will precede that. There'll be a review and comment period, responses to comments, and the statutory deadline for completing this is January 2023. In other words, we have to have an adopted housing element submitted to the state by January 31st of 2023. So that's really driving our timeline and our CEQA process. Next slide.
It's odd.
Is it sticking?
Yes.
If you need to exit and just manually go to the next slide using the PowerPoint, that would work too, I think, if you hit escape. There you go. Okay. Yeah, we're down on this slide. That's fine. We can just keep it in this view. We've only got one more slide after this. This is essentially just providing the contact information for submitting comments. The deadline for submitting comments on the notice of preparation is March 7th, 2022, a few weeks from now by 5 p.m. You can submit comments in writing. You can see the address here on the screen at Town of Moraga Planning Department, attention Afshar Hamid, 329 Ream Boulevard, Moraga, California, 94556, or you can send your comments by email, and you would be emailing them to makemoraga@moraga.ca.us. And then I believe we have another slide, which is just kind of a promotion for the housing survey. As part of the housing element update, we do have a survey that's out on the internet right now. We're encouraging all Moraga residents and those who work in Moraga to please take the survey. It's really about what you'd like to see the town focus on as it addresses housing needs. So we have a state requirement as part of the housing element, but this is also an opportunity for the town to address needs that are identified by the community. So if you turn your phone on photo and hold it in front of that QR code, it will open up a web link that takes you to the survey. We're encouraging everyone to do that before March 15th, which is when the survey will close. And I believe that's the last slide, and we can go to comments at this point. Okay. And Afshar, were you going to take the lead on soliciting any comments?
Sure. I only see, I know Mimi McNamara is with Rincon. And Dave, I see that you're here. Did you want to make comments? Did you want to provide us some verbal comments? You can also make written comments and we'll let you in. Mio, can you unmute Dave? Thank you.
I think your audio is on now, Dave.
Hi. No, I don't have any verbal comments, but our lawyers did submit some written comments, and obviously, yeah, I guess I have a question on. It sounds like you're submitting something to the HCD, so I'm not sure what you're submitting to the HCD while we're undergoing the EIR analysis. So what was that?
Sure, that's the draft housing element that will be submitted to HCD. So that's all the technical information and the draft policies and programs for housing. We would not be submitting other parts of the general plan or any zoning text or anything like that to the state. This is strictly just the housing element that they require that we send them that for 90 days to review before we adopt anything.
So when is that available for us to review?
Well, it would be reviewed by the Planning Commission and the Town Council before it gets submitted to HCD. So likely at the end of May, there'd be a document out, and then that would go to the Planning Commission for a hearing and the council for a hearing, but they wouldn't be adopting anything at that point. They would just be authorizing staff to submit this working draft to the state.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So I don't know that there are any other comments.
I don't see any other attendees. Should we just wait till 6:30?
Sure. And I encourage everyone to put their comments in writing to the town on the scope of the environmental document. We will take all of those under consideration. And yeah, there'll also be a notification when the draft EIR is published. That will be part of all of the noticing that happens with the town.
And Darcy, is 6:30 sufficient?
Yeah, we can close it whenever. There's
Okay.
no requirement for the scoping meeting to go any longer than necessary to receive comments from the public.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. I had one that lasted about 8 minutes, so it just
Okay.
depends. No comments. It is what it is.
And then, Barry, do you just want to give an update on how many people responded to the survey so far?
Sure. As of 4 o'clock today, we had 351 responses, and then actually 352. We do have one comment that came in one survey that came in on the Spanish survey.
Nice.
So yeah,
Nice. That's great.
I believe we're going to try and put some more flyers up so that we get some additional responses.
Yeah, we did put up some at some of the businesses. Unfortunately, the hacienda is under construction,
Mhm.
so it's not the best place to put up a survey, but I think we've hit all the other spots, and we did the farmers market as well.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 6:30. So I think we've allowed for sufficient time. Darcy, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I think we still have until March 7th, 5 p.m. to receive written comments.
Correct.
So I think we can all exit the meeting now. Thank you, everyone, for everyone that attended tonight or is just listening.
Yes. Thank
We
you.
will post this meeting on the town's website as well. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.